Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. My name is Savannah Playford, the Director of Youth Ministry at Dixon United Methodist Church. Whenever you are watching this, welcome to today's daily devotion. Do you remember the story of David and Goliath? Who doesn't, right? We have all learned about this story at some point in our Sunday school career. For some of us, it might have been a while ago, so let me give you a quick recap. You can find this story in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Basically, an epic battle was supposed to happen between the Philistines and the Israelites. They were set to battle, ready to go, and they thought, wait, instead of having a lot of people die, why don't we both send our best warriors from each side, and they can fight one-on-one, and then whoever wins will be declared the winner. Of course, both sides agreed. So the Philistines, they got together and they sent their best warrior, Goliath. He was over 9 feet tall, strong, had a good protective helmet, good body armor, and a spearhead. He was ready to go and set to fight. He actually walked around every day until they got ready to fight, mocking the Israelites and bragging about how much better and how much more prepared he was. Of course, Saul and the Israelites were terrified when they saw Goliath and how big he was. Long story short, after searching through their army, sifting through their soldiers, praying, getting all this stuff, they come across David. Here's a little bit of a background on David. David was an ordinary guy, nothing special, and definitely not as strong and ready as some of the other soldiers may have been. David was the youngest son of Jesse, who was a shepherd, and honestly the black sheep of the family. He was a little different. In fact, some of his brothers were soldiers and were in that army that were getting ready to fight. Needless to say, David is not the guy you would be putting your money on to win this fight. But David persisted and assured everybody that he would win the fight because he knew that God was on his side. You see, when David faced Goliath, he didn't talk about how dangerous and scary and bad Goliath was, but instead he talked about how big and bad and great God is. And as we all know how the story ends, David goes on to pull a quick victory over Goliath due to the strength and power that God has given him. It's a really great story, but how can we apply that story to things that we may be facing now? Well, how can we learn to face our own giants, and how can we take a different perspective and change our Goliath thinking that we are bigger and better than everybody else? Well, let's take a look at the two characters involved. So Goliath was a giant with an attitude. He held everybody at bay with his intimidation and his size. He was strong, had great strength, but he also had some weaknesses. His biggest weakness was not taking David seriously, but also not believing or trusting in God. And as we've seen time and time again throughout the Bible, God equips those who trust him in great spiritual armor. David, on the other hand, had his weaknesses too. He directly went against God multiple times. He committed adultery, planned to kill people, and engaged in sins, just as we all do. The difference, though, is that David, when he committed his sins, he was honest. He opened up about his sins and turned to God and asked for forgiveness. Too often, I think that many of us would rather avoid consequences than to own up and accept our consequences and accept forgiveness. Another thing that made David so great is that he learned from his sins and did not sin repeatedly. That's something that's very hard for us to do, and especially hard for us young people to do, because we need to sin 3 to 4 to 100 times before we finally see the issue and see the light at the end of the tunnel. So, with all of that being said, how can we face our Goliaths today? And how can we change our Goliath thinking into trusting God? Well, first and foremost, we need to pray. Pray often as you can, and pray with each other, and pray by yourself. Prayer is the easiest and best way to talk to God. Step 2, we also need to trust. Trust God and to trust others, and also to trust ourselves and remind ourselves that we are strong and we can do it because we have God on our side. And lastly, we also need to get our army and our warriors together. That's all of your church family, your friends, anybody who can support you in whatever Goliaths you may be thinking and facing right now. So I ask you this, and I tell you to reflect on this. What are the Goliaths that you may be facing right now? How does your Goliath block your vision and make it hard to hear from God? Sometimes all we have to do is change our Goliath thinking and perspective. think a little bit more like David, get our army on our side, and then we definitely can face that Goliath. So, as you go about your day and your week, think about the Goliaths that you may be facing and how can you change your perspective to tackle that giant in front of you.